Hello and welcome back to the Toffee Blues YouTube channel, your source for all things Everton. My name's Thomas, back on the channel today with another very special video. We bring these videos every now and then where we talk about the state of the club's management, the finances, everything. Obviously, no better man than Paul. You might know him slightly better as the Esk on Twitter. If you don't know him, then you've been living under a rock. We've had him on the channel a few times now. He's massive on Twitter, writes some brilliant articles. And after we've done this video, be sure to check those articles out as well, because we're going to touch on a couple of those points, but not in as much detail as Paul goes into. But Paul, thanks for coming on. How are you doing today?
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Thomas. Looking forward to chatting to you as always. Yeah, plenty to talk about.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for coming on. And we'll start basically at the very top. We'll start with Moshiri, obviously. Before we get into all the news about kind of the AGM and all that going online, and the controversy surrounding that, I'd like to start kind of at the very point of where we find ourselves right now. The club's obviously making massive losses every year. Moshiri is obviously investing money in areas to kind of off-put that. We saw in the summer as well. We couldn't invest massive money. I'd imagine that's the same going on. But if we kind of start with, you know, the losses that the clubs make, and just a brief explanation of, you know we make a lot of losses. We don't make much back on player sales. Obviously, there was the pandemic, which no one could have predicted. But what is the state of the club right now, considering we know we can't spend as much as we did? But is it all going downhill, or what is the general situation?
Is it all going downhill? Not even I would say it's all going downhill. I think it's fair to say that we find ourselves in a position that 6 years ago, because Moshiri's now nearly been with us now for 6 years, wouldn't possibly have ever believed we would be in. And I think it comes down to two main points with Moshiri. Moshiri's in the for 5 years, 9 months, he's been a shareholder of the club. I think the fans have been extraordinarily patient with him, which is to the fans' credit. We've accepted that he's made poor decisions along the way, but because he was backing those poor decisions with more money in order to repair the damage that his previous decisions had made, I think everybody was prepared to give him the benefit of the doubt. Over the summer, not necessarily because he didn't want to put money in. Obviously, there wasn't much money available, either in terms of transfer fees, but also in terms of increasing the overall wage bill. So the sort of the thing that has got Moshiri's bad decisions, got him out of trouble in the past, which has always been to give the manager or to give the director of football or even his own decision making lots of money in order to go and try and spend your way out of the problem. He couldn't do this last summer, quite obviously, and he won't be able to do it in this January, and it's very unlikely he'll be able to do it next summer, even though some significant costs are going to disappear going into next year. What we spend in the summer will be dependent upon what losses we've made in the previous year, because assuming that profitability and sustainability continues, and there is an argument that says that won't continue, and I might touch on that in a little bit later, what UEFA's view is on their financial fair play. But assuming that it still is in place next year, we're not going to be in a much better position next summer because of all of the accumulated losses from the previous sort of 3 or 4 years, some of which is related to COVID, of course. But even if you strip out the COVID-related costs, and if you strip out the costs that we're allowed to strip out in terms of the stadium, in terms of the women's football, in terms of the academy, and in terms of what we do in the community, even when you've stripped out all of those costs, you can't get our losses to a figure that's compliant with the Premier League regulations. So he won't be able to spend his way out in the future. And the problem then is, so what does he do? Now, my view, and I've held this view since the day he's been there, is that one of the ways of addressing the problems that the club has is to change the management. That's typically what any new owner of a business does. Because if you recall, when he came to us in 2016, okay, we were a decent cup team under Martinez, but we were sort of struggling mid-table in the league, and we had a pretty poor financial record. You were 54 million in debt at the time. So we weren't in a very strong position when Mashiri came to us. And you'd have thought that because of that position, and because it was the people who were on the board and the people who were in the executive positions who'd got us to that position, that Mashiri, one thing that Mashiri would do, apart from putting money into the club, is he would make changes at board level, and he would make changes in terms of the chairman, and he'd probably make changes in terms of the senior executives, which at the time was Robert Elston, but obviously subsequently Denise Baxendale. Now, he hasn't really done that. The only director that has left on performance grounds is Keith Harris. John Wood's retired, and both Sasha and Ismailov have gone for their own reasons. The people that have stayed and the people that have been brought in from within the organization, from my perspective, haven't performed adequately. And I think that's the big mystery is as to why Mashiri hasn't acted on that front. And I think this forthcoming annual general meeting, even though he's not on the board of directors, and the idea is that you ask the directors questions, I think a lot of the focus will be on Mashiri and why Mashiri hasn't made the changes which are patently obvious for anybody, be they Evertonians or elsewhere, if they do any sort of analysis of the club. Sorry, that's a long answer, but I think Mashiri is going to be under a lot of pressure from Evertonians, and particularly the Benitez decision. We sort of accepted it because there wasn't really another candidate that we were likely to get. And to be fair to Benitez, certainly in the first few months of his tenure, he performed well, but we haven't performed very well as a team in the last sort of Tottenham game is okay, I suppose, but last 3 games, certainly the West Ham and the Watford game before it. And there is the prospect that we might lose four out of the next 5 games. That's not being unduly negative. It's just saying, if you look at our fixture list coming up, tough fixtures. So we might find ourselves by Christmas in, the bottom third of the league. Benitez will get a lot of stick from some Evertonians just by virtue of the fact that he's, former Liverpool manager. But I actually think that if that was to happen, it would be the board and it would be Mashiri that would be under more pressure than Benitez, because I can't see a situation where, unless Benitez wanted to go, the club are going to get rid of him. I think they recognise that they need stability, even if it's becomes an unpalatable stability. He's going to be. I think Mashiri's going to be under an awful lot of pressure by this year end.
Yeah, I think so. And the bit that you touched on Benitez at the end, it's despite the fact we've only won 1 and 8, and we do have this tricky run of fixtures. The board didn't hire him necessarily listening to the fans at all. There was a lot of protest. There was a lot of objection to it, and I do believe that they wouldn't have hired him if they were just going to sack him at the first turn of bad results, because they obviously are looking for stability, and the recruitment is something we're definitely going to get onto. But it's almost as if the Mashiri didn't listen to the fans in the first place in terms of Benitez appointment. And I'd say the majority probably didn't want him. As you mentioned, there weren't too many options, but despite the fact I don't think our results are going to turn around, I can't see Benitez going anywhere, because that wouldn't have made a lot of sense. And something I wanted to touch on as well, just before we move on to kind of, the more football inside the recruitment and everything, is I think you wrote in your article about good governance. You related it to a football perspective, and the makeup of the board that we have at the moment. Well, it basically spells disaster, really. It's not exactly a very good system that we've got in place, in order to gain success, really. And obviously, I'm going to hope you can make a lot more sense of that than I can, but was it something like, a lot of the board are in executive roles. There's not that much kind of distinction between, the board and then, the people that are meant to be in charge of the football. There's a lot of people at this football club who, there's basically no distinction between the football and the business, and it's all just a bit of a mess. But I think you did mention a point that the makeup of the board that we have at the moment is, it's far from ideal.
Well, yeah, I think first of all you said that very well.
Thank you very much.
So well done. Yeah, look, there's a thing that's called governance in business, and I mean, not only in business but other areas in terms of organizations, and governance is all about how a business is controlled and directed, and that's really, really, really important, because without control and without direction, you don't know where the business is going to go, and if things get difficult, then it becomes very difficult if you don't have the right structure and if you don't have the right people in place. The difficulty Everton have, and I may as well be very blunt, is that first of all, everybody on the board has an executive role within the club. So what does that mean? Well, it means that they're all doing jobs within the club. So it's like sort of marking your own homework. One of the roles of a board is to listen to the shareholders on the one hand. It's to be that conduit between the shareholders, what the shareholders want, and what the people who run the club are doing. And the problem that we have, well, one of the problems that we have, is that the people that are doing everything are the people who sit on the board. And I just know from my own experience elsewhere, it's very, very rare when that happens that a business performs well, because the people are not the people who are doing the stuff, the executives. There's no external opinion that says you're doing a good job or you're doing a bad job, or this strategy is good, this strategy perhaps you might want to tweak it this way. There's no what's the word? There's no oversight. And most successful businesses and successful organizations, they have the core people who do everything, but then they have a group of people around them that have got other interests elsewhere, or greater experience perhaps elsewhere, who use that experience and use that knowledge to assist the organization that they're a non-executive director of. And we just don't have that. And it is extraordinary. It makes it really difficult to hold the executive to account, because as I say, it's like people marking their own homework. You give people the answers, and then you can pretty much make up the mark yourself. So it's really difficult. The second point is that if you compare the experience of each of the board members, with the exception of Marcel Brands, they don't compare favorably with the competitors. So the CEO, the chairman, if you look at other clubs, and certainly if you look at the top clubs, either in the Premier League or across Europe, the people who run those clubs, the people in those positions, the chair, the CEO, etc., have a much wider business experience, and frankly have achieved much more in their commercial life or their careers. So you have to believe that those people are better doing what they're doing than our people are. So we've got a very small board. We don't have any oversight. And the people that are doing the stuff that needs to be done, in my opinion, aren't very good at doing what they do. So it's not a surprise really that Moshiri spent £450 million and got very little in return for it. The question, the thing that needs to be answered by Moshiri is, why does he allow it to happen? Because I can't think of other businesses where the main shareholder would just allow such poor performance relative to the resources that they've been given. And that's the question that I think football fans and the minority shareholders at Everton have to ask Farhad Moshiri. And the ideal opportunity would be the annual general meeting, because he's not a man that makes himself available to discuss any other time. Ideally, if he held a forum once or twice a year, we could have those discussions, but it doesn't happen.
Yeah, it is shocking, and it's almost unbelievable that a man is he's happy to invest so much money into such a poor structure, and it's evident there's such poor structure. As you said at the start, he's been here for 6 years now. We've achieved nothing, so that there is evident problems, and it seems unbelievable that a man it's not that he doesn't want return for his money. He's happy to continue with a structure where it's almost inevitable that he's not going to get a return for his money. I mean, obviously, the football inside, well, that is what it ends up. If the team has to be successful, and well, he knows after 6 years, surely, that he can't rely on that, because, as I mentioned, we have achieved nothing in the past 6 years, and it seems absolutely baffling that a man is happy to invest so much money but not change the structure of the club that's failing to kind of give him a return on his investment. And it seems ridiculous to say out loud, because it's like, I'm sure you wouldn't see this in businesses anywhere, really, because it absolutely makes no sense. And you touched on the AGM there, which obviously I wanted to get to as well. There's obviously massive news in the past week or so that they're looking to move it. Well, they want a motion to move it all online, as it was in the pandemic, which they claim they're still going to answer questions. They're going to answer all the questions that were submitted. I think that's highly unlikely. That wasn't necessarily the case last year, even despite the circumstances. They want to do this going forwards, but it screams a lack of accountability. They haven't been in touch with. Well, he hasn't met with the shareholders. The minority shareholders, which he said he would have. So the idea that they are going to move the AGM online, despite the fact they claim that they're still going to be held to accountability, they're still going to respond to the questions. That's just not the case, is it?
No, it's not. Just before I get to that, and I'll come back to it in a second. Just to go back to Moshiri for 1 minute. The biggest issue I think he has is he's just not very good at recruiting. And if you think about it, it's his role as a majority shareholder to recruit the directors. Yeah, he's failed to do that, and when he has brought people in like Keith Harris, frankly they haven't performed, which is no great surprise. He hasn't been able to recruit an executive team, either because he chose not to or because he just can't. And then if you look at the managers that he's recruited, there's no consistency in terms of the managers that he's recruited, and there were all seemed like what seems like obvious errors to each of the managers that were chosen, including Ancelotti. And then if you think about, well, we brought in Steve Walsh. I think Steve Walsh gets a really bad rap. Actually, I think he did far better than most people think. But then he wasn't given the structure that he could operate in properly. And Ronald Koeman sort of dominated Steve Walsh to the extent that he couldn't do what he wanted to do. But also then, if you look at what, Moshiri's football, not that he should be selecting football players, but clearly he has selected some football players in the last 6 years. Sorry?
The Fab Four, Sigurdsson, Rooney, Balassi.
Exactly.
Terrible.
Yeah. And, he's selected Tosin, for example. Iwobi was certainly one of his selections as well. He's just not very good at selecting people. And it's really unfortunate. It's really unfortunate that, first of all, as majority shareholder, it's effectively his role to select directors. But then also he gets involved in the footballing side and he screws up the footballing side as well. So I think that's the major problem. And of course, in order to stop him from doing that, what you really need is a really strong chairman and a really strong CEO who says to Fahad Moshiri, appreciate you giving us all the money, now let us run the business, which is what happened elsewhere. So sorry, that was just the final answer to the previous question. I think they haven't read the room properly in terms of moving.
Unsurprising.
Yeah, moving online. I can't buy the argument that because of COVID, you can't have 300 or 400 people meeting in the Philharmonic Hall that holds 2,000 or 3,000. So it's nowhere near capacity. Yet we can fill out Goodison every week at 40,000 without anybody really making any consideration as to the impact of the pandemic. It's just disingenuous from my perspective. Yeah. And it does nothing to take away the belief that they don't wish to be held to account. That's it's really bad mood music, especially if we are going into a difficult position. As I said at the beginning, not everything is wrong with the club. The stadium is being built. There's some progress. in the academy, from what I'm told, although the head of the academy shouldn't probably be in the position that he's in. So there are little things that are working well, and obviously nothing to do with the football club, but the charity remains, a jewel in the city's crown, not the football club's crown, in the city's crown. So there are things that are working, but the main things aren't. And to deny people the opportunity to stand in the same room or to sit in the same room as the people responsible for all of the difficulties that we're having just seems bonkers to me. You're sort of taught it. Your parents teach you. You're taught at school that if you make a mistake or if you've done something wrong, you put your hand up and you explain your position, and then life can move on. To deny people the opportunity to do it face to face just is it's just another example of not reading the room. It's almost cowardice from my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you touched on we know there's a lack of accountability in the club. He doesn't speak often. He doesn't meet the fans pretty much ever. And I think you mentioned something in your article as well. I'm not trying to claim this as my own, but it's something along the lines of recruitment's something that's very expensive when you get it wrong, as we've seen that the club makes a lot of loss, but it then takes significant investment to turn around. So he's always found himself kind of between a rock and a hard place. Now it's pretty much entirely of his own making at this point. He has failed to form a proper structure at the club, which is going to allow success. But we now got to a point where it can be turned around. Obviously, this is not the end of the road. It's not the end of the day, but it's going to take significant investment once again, because poor recruitment from a footballing perspective, I think that's the best way to kind of, it's not metaphorical because we're still talking about football, but as a metaphor, it applies to the structure as well. If you sign poor players, you're going to have to invest further to get better players back at the end of the day. And that works, I'd imagine, kind of across the board. It's costly to get it wrong in the first place, but you can't keep getting it wrong. You then have to further invest to kind of get yourself back out of that hole. Am I along the right lines there? That it's going to take, it's not the end of the road. There is still time to change, but the change has to come relatively soon.
It just gets more and more difficult the longer it goes on. I don't think he was wrong to make the investments that he made. Obviously, the choices that he made, or the choices that managers and director of football have made, we can argue about those all day long, and they're fairly obvious what the really bad choices were. But the idea of investing a lot of money into the team when he did, in order to get performance to a level where we were much higher up in the league, so we generate more income from the Premier League. So that makes sense, both from a footballing perspective, but also from an investment point of view. But the real goal was to get into European football on a regular basis, because that's where the massive increase from where we are in terms of revenue to where we could be. That's what generates it at the end of the day. It's getting into, first of all, Europa League, but then getting into the Champions League and being there regularly. And Ronald Koeman did an interview, which I've referred to a few times, on the BBC in 2017, actually not long before he was sacked. Sorry, 2000 was it? The end of 2016. So the 16-17 season. And he said, look, we've got a plan. The plan in the first season is to do slightly better than we've done previously. So that meant somewhere between 10th and say 6th. But then the plan in the second year is to get European qualification, Europa League, and then maybe the Champions League in the third year. And it was clear that was what the plan was, because he said it, he said it without being asked. He just volunteered it. And the money was put into the club in order for us to do that. But we made the wrong decisions in terms of the people that we brought in, including the manager, Ronald Koeman. So Moshiri's strategy to begin with was right. It was just really badly executed. But the problem that you then have is somebody described it to me the other day as, so you're walking down a corridor and that corridor is getting narrower and narrower, but you're getting fatter and fatter. So you're squeezing yourself into like the thin end of a tube. And it's so difficult to turn around from that situation, because you're, by virtue of what you've lost in the past, you can't spend money in the future. But it costs more to rectify what you've done because of the mistakes that you've done. So you get this massive double whammy. And we're just going to have to be, I think as a fan base, I think we're going to have to be really patient, because it's going to take a couple of years to unwind all of the positions that we're in, and yet still replace those people that we're going to lose. But the people that we're going to bring into the club are not going to be expensive players, because we can't afford to do that. They're going to be, a Gray, a Townsend. They're going to be that type of player, unfortunately. So it's going to take time, and that's it's unfortunate for us. It's frustrating for us as fans, because we look at it from the perspective, we haven't won anything in 26 years. So we want something. Now, we might get, a favourable cup draw and end up at Wembley, and we might win the FA Cup, and that would be fantastic. But it wouldn't change anything materially, other than the fact that the fans, all of us, we would have a great day out. It wouldn't necessarily change the direction in which the club is going. The only thing that can change the direction in which the club is going is performance in the Premier League, and final league position in the Premier League, qualification for Europe. That's the thing that needs to happen, regardless of the fact that we're going to have a stadium in 2 or 3 years' time. We need to get to European football. The question is whether Benitez is skilled enough to get us to European football with the squad he's got.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of just before we round up, I know you mentioned at the start that you wanted to kind of get onto the UEFA changing their rules around the financial fair play, things so forth. So kind of just to round off, it's all sounded a bit dismal. It hasn't gone wrong so far. It has gone wrong so far. Sorry, but it does feel like we are almost at a turning point. The fans, not that they're turning on Moshiri, and it almost feels arrogant. The man's invested so much money. He's invested absolute millions into the club. But we've reached a stage now where the fans are beginning to ask questions. Not that anyone wants them to leave, not that anyone wants them to take billions somewhere else. We want them to stay. But there clearly needs to be changes. I think everyone recognises that now. And with potentially, as you mentioned, UEFA changing their rules, there's always pressure being put on the Premier League, especially now the Saudis have turned up just down the road from me. And it just seems at this point that there are going to be changes. There are positives to look forward to. Your analogy of getting fatter, walking down a narrower corridor. So it is going to be a squeeze. There is going to be patience. But just to kind of round off, that there is potential to change, and it could improve.
Look, it's very likely that UEFA are going to turn around to all the clubs competing in Europe and say, look, FFP is dead. The idea that you have to break even or you can only lose a small amount of money, forget about that. All we're interested in is, can you prove that whoever owns you can afford to do whatever it is that you want to do? So complete open season. If you've got an owner that can throw 100 million, 200 million, whatever the figure is, as long as you can prove that you can do that, he or she can do that, then UEFA are going to be happy with that. If that happens, the Premier League is forced then to follow suit, because it would put the English clubs at a competitive disadvantage in Europe if we held on with our restrictions, and PSG and everybody else can just do what they like. So naturally, the Premier League would follow suit if that is the case. That would then allow us to spend more money, assuming that Moshiri wants to put more money in. Or alternatively, it would allow us to go and find other investors. And I'm not talking about Usmanov here, because I think if Usmanov had wanted to invest in Everton, he would have done so a long time ago. But it would allow us to bring other investors in, and it would make the problems that we've currently got go away. Not completely, because the competitive pressures are great, and there's an awful lot of other clubs who are now in a much stronger position than they were. West Ham have got a billionaire that's at least twice as wealthy as Moshiri as a minority shareholder. Now he wants to put money into West Ham. Crystal Palace are bringing investors in. All of these clubs, which 5-6 years ago we wouldn't think would ever be competing with us, they're all now in a slightly better place than we are. But if the rules change, then that's the opportunity to rewind the clock and start again. If the rules don't change, then we have to be very patient.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. That pretty much does bring me to the end of my questions. So thank you very much for watching, Paul. Absolute privilege as always. Thanks for coming on. And well, you got a bit of a series of articles, haven't you got going on? So if your viewers want to kind of get into more detail, where can they look for that?
Well, my website, which is theesk.org, or everything that's on Twitter under the Esk. Toffee Web also carry all of my articles. The next one is about Directorate Football, and that should be out either tomorrow or Sunday at the very latest. So I really enjoyed writing that one. So I hope people enjoy reading it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you very much for watching. As always, thanks to Paul for coming on. Check out that article as well, because I'm sure everyone's got their opinions about the Director of Football. People have their opinions about everything at the club. So definitely check that out. Thank you very much for watching. Let us know your thoughts down below and join us next time on the Toffee Blues.